Today is August 5th, 2022. I'm in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Here's a timeline of this study of the Earth's subtle energy field. In March 1994, I discovered the first archaeological site in Big Sur's Los Padres National Forest above Jade Cove. It's a celestial observatory aligned to the equinox sunrise point. In September of 2004, I made the first ground survey, photo survey of the site. Discovered that the U.S. Forest Service had no prior knowledge of the site existence after seeing the ground survey photos. They dated nearby artifacts to years ago. In March of 2009, discovered a second site 5 miles away from the first, a stone circle complex, pentagram within a pentagram within a pentagon, marking the eight-year cycle of Venus within the 60-year cycle of Jupiter and Saturn. In September 9th and 10th, I did first an aerial survey of the first and second site, and then the next day a ground survey of the second site. In February of 2010, I released a 90-minute documentary, Emergence beyond 2012, explaining everything that I knew up to that point about the sites and discoveries in Big Sur. In September of 2012, I published Emergence Beyond, a basic straight transcript of the Emergence Beyond 2012 documentary. Between 2017 and 2019, 3 new Emperor Dragon pairs of the largest subtle energy lines appears on the Earth. Before 2017, there were only 3 pairs on the planet, and they only crossed one another in 6 places, and only 4 of those places are on land. So, between 2017 and 2019, 3 more pairs show up, doubling the number of Emperor Dragons on the planet. That means that there were then 12 Emperor Dragons in 6 pairs. In June of 2019, I received a photograph from the noted British geologist Rory McQuestion, aka Rory Duff, of a subtle energy node 100 yards away from the Big Sur archaeological site I discovered in 1994. The node consists of 2 solar-generated lines crossing and one of the new Emperor Dragon lines passing through their crossing point, forming the first Emperor Dragon node on the west coast of North America. So there are 3 orders of subtle energy lines. Those generated, they're all distinguished by what generates them. Those generated by the Earth, those generated by the Sun, and those generated by the centers of galaxies in our galactic neighborhood. So the ones generated by the Earth's core rotates against its outer core and creates a low-frequency sound wave that radiates to the surface, and we experience that as a ley line on the surface. The second order of ley lines, or subtle energy lines, are the solar-generated ones, and those are caused by cosmic radiation coming from the Sun. When it hits the upper atmosphere, it's converted to, or generates these subatomic particles called neutrinos that shoot down through the Earth, and eventually, usually on the quantum level, everything is so far apart they rarely hit anything, but at the density of the core of the Earth, they hit enough things to make a low-frequency sound wave that radiates to the surface, and we experience that as a ley line, the solar-generated lines. The third order of line is caused by cosmic radiation, beams of cosmic radiation coming from the centers of galaxies in our galactic neighborhood. Up until 2017, there were 3 galaxies whose beams were reaching our upper atmosphere and creating these neutrino streams that created low-frequency sound waves when they contacted the core of the Earth. And those low-frequency sound waves radiated to the surface, and we experienced those as 50 pace wide, what have been called Emperor Dragon lines. The solar lines were between 10, 20, and 30 paces wide. and the Earth-generated lines were between 1 pace and 5 paces 5 paces wide, and that was all before 2017. Between 2017 and 2019, 3 new pairs show up of Emperor Dragon lines, and it changes the whole system. It had been changing gradually since we had first started measuring them. Rory did a survey between 2008 and 2010 where he measured all the subtle energy lines in his vicinity, and he lived in southern England, so there's a lot of them there. And what he discovered was that at 4 times of the year, all the subtle energy lines on the planet would vibrate at the same frequency. And those 4 points were the solstices and equinoxes. And back then, the Earth-generated lines vibrated at the quickest frequency. So they were vibrating at between 10 and 16 hours in a day. And what that meant is that if it's vibrating at 10, that means that the line moves to the right or moves to the left, for 5 hours. Then it moves back to the right for 5 hours. That would be a frequency of 10 hours. If it's 16, then it moves 8 hours to the left and 8 hours to the right. So the solar lines usually vibrated around 24 hours. That meant 12 hours to the left, 12 hours to the right. The Emperor Dragon lines had a frequency of 48 hours, so they would move 24 hours to the left and 24 hours to the right. What he discovered is that they, for what we would call the harmony period, they would all vibrate at the same frequency, which means that the ones that are moving really fast would slow down, and the ones that are moving really slow would speed up, and they'd all meet around 24 hours, so around the solar vibratory frequencies. What ended up happening is, after 2017, or even leading up to 2017, the harmony period began to expand itself from, initially it was all on the first, just on the solstice and equinox, and then it was, 2 days, then 3 days, and so forth, till this last equinox in March. They were 15 days long. The harmony period was 15 days long. Since the Emperor Dragons, the 3 new Emperor Dragons have shown up, they no longer carry on the pattern that they did before. They, all of the ley lines slow down to match the majority of the Emperor Dragon's frequency, 48 hours. So whether it's an Earth-generated line or a solar-generated line, it slows down to match the Emperor Dragons. And that had been slowly happening. And then the Emperor Dragons showed up, the 3 new Emperor Dragons. Before that, there were only 6 places on the planet where Emperor Dragons cross one another, and only 4 of those places were on land, and now there are at least 20 of those places. And there's only, before 2017, there were no Emperor Dragons in North America, and now there are 2 pair, and they cross in Virginia. And there's the one that goes east and west from California to Virginia. That is the one that I first started dowsing in 2019. And then there's the one that showed up in 2017 that goes pole to pole, crosses through the United States, through New York, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and the Carolinas, and that goes down to Peru before going to the South Pole. And the one that goes east and west is, this one that I initially began to dowse at the winter solstice of 2019. It's the first thing I ever dowsed. I dowsed the node that's above Jade Cove in Big Sur. And at that time, the Emperor Dragon was 50 paces wide. So let me get back down into this. In June of 2019, I received a photograph from the noted British geologist Rory McQuestion, aka Rory Duff, at a subtle energy node 100 yards away from the Big Sur archeological site discovered in 1994. The node consists of two solar-generated lines crossing and one of the new Emperor Dragon lines passing through their crossing point, forming the first Emperor Dragon node on the west coast of North America. In December, the December solstice of 2019, I dowsed the Big Sur line and its parallel twin in Monterey for the first time. They were both 50 paces wide. The solar generated lines were between 10 and 30 paces wide. In the June solstice of 2020, the solar lines were 80 paces wide, and the ED, the Emperor Dragon lines, were between 100 and 120 paces wide. September 2021, I dowsed where the California EDs contact the Atlantic in Virginia and cross the first ED pair that's arrived in 2017. It goes pole to pole, bracketing the pole. Measured both EDs to be approximately 600 paces wide. Also dowsed the solar line 100 paces wide that runs through the oldest ruins in Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. In December, for the December solstice of 2021, Jade Cove Emperor Dragon was over half a mile wide and moved 10 feet while being measured. In the March equinox of 2022, the Emperor Dragon expanded to be 4 miles wide. In May of 2022, I measured both the Monterey and the Big Sur lines twice, and they were still 4 miles wide. On June 15th, I measured the Jade Cove Emperor Dragon, and it still measured 4 miles wide. The next morning, I began my measurement around 10:30, and it was already moving. And I measured it every day through the solstice, June 21st, and each day it moved 4 miles, moved to be expanded 4 miles on both sides, to be 4 miles wider. And so by the solstice, it was 24 miles wide. And I did a calculation, and I figured that by the 28th of June, they would have, would completely overlap one another. The edges would overlap one another. And then Rory and a couple of other people he's working with in England, they were able to determine that the harmony period lasted 18 days this time and ended on July 8th. And I was able to confirm that the expansion stopped on July 8th at the end of the harmony period. And how I established that was I did a measurement just outside of St. Louis, Missouri, where I was able to find the edge, the northern edge of the Emperor Dragon, 46 miles north of the center line. And that pretty much confirmed that the expansion wasn't limited to California, that it was most likely happening to all of the emperor dragons. But to be sure, I actually found and dowsed the edges of what the emperor dragon pair that goes north and south and crosses the east and west one in Virginia. I was able to find the edges 46 miles from the center line, 92 miles wide, in what is that? West Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania area, and I was able to find the western edge of the western emperor dragon and the eastern edge of the eastern emperor dragon, and confirmed that they were both 46 miles from their original center lines. Thus, each emperor dragon was 92 miles wide, which means that it's a pretty safe bet that all of the emperor dragons all over the world are now 92 miles wide. And that means that because a node can only be as wide as the lines that make it up, that means that all the nodes that the emperor dragons go through are now 92 miles wide. So that's basically everything I have. The rest is kind of conjecture. I know that the most common question I've gotten so far is, what does it all mean? And I am not afraid to say that I do not know, that we're all figuring this out on the fly. But I will tell you that as the most exposed person in the northern hemisphere, or at least the western hemisphere, to this sort of energy, I have noticed a certain amount of, dare I say, synesthesia, right? Expansion of my ability to perceive through different senses and beyond my normal five senses. So what it means is whatever we make of it, essentially, at this point. But I will tell you that I'm going to be on station doing measurements in September to see if the full moon has an effect in triggering the expansion, as it did. It appears to have in June. And if that's true, when as and if it starts to expand again, it'll most likely not, if it's true to pattern, it will not be at the same rate it was at the last expansion period. And either way, Washington, D.C. is about to be consumed by this energy sometime over the next 6 months, in either the September expansion or the December solstice expansion, if they expand at all. Who knows? Maybe that's just it, but I doubt it, because what's important to remember is that these are sound structures. We perceive them as lines, but that's because we're hitting them at a two-dimensional level, right? These are sound structures that are emanating from the core of the planet, and they continue on up into the atmosphere, but they also resound back down through the earth. And when they do that, they create even more complexity. And so there's no way to know what's going to happen. But if the patterns that we've seen hold, there's no off switch to this. it's a possibility that over the next several years, if things continue going in this direction, the whole planet will be covered in layers of this energy. So, things to look forward to. What does it mean? Stay tuned.